Welcome to Keep It Humane, the podcast, where we dive deep into topics surrounding kindness, compassion, and creating a more humane world, whether it's in our communities, in the workplace, or in the world of animal control and shelters. With our hosts,
Ashley Bishop.
And Ashley Bishop.
And I'm Daniel Ettinger. This show is sponsored by Tomahawk Live Trap. Check them out, livetrap.com.
Before we begin, a quick note. This episode contains discussion of domestic violence, which may be distressing for some listeners. Please take care while listening and skip this episode if you need to.
Welcome back. It is us. It is Daniel and Ashley with the other Ashley Bishop. She has a great job today. She is working as an usher at the Green Bay Packers game. I would love to be in her section. I think she's in section 134, and she doesn't play around. 2-drink minimum.
That's real specific, Sam.
Yeah, that's where she's at today. How you doing, Ashley?
Good. Last week just finally slowed down for us a little bit. I know it was a little hectic for everybody else. But good. We're just getting in the motions of, the fall coming through. Today in Texas is actually a very nice day. It's under 80 degrees right now. I'm really excited. But we're good. We're trucking along, just, trying to do our best in our tiny little shelter. How are you, Dan?
I'm sure you're doing great. I am about to start my marathon, and I don't know how I feel about it. Not like a running marathon.
I was like,
though I have been running again, so that's been a blessing. But I have trips scheduled the next 3 weekends in a row. So,
oh goodness.
yeah.
I don't know how you do it, man.
I don't know how I do it and why I do it anymore. I look at this schedule and I'm like, I'll be honest though, as much as I don't want to do all 3 weeks in a row, tomorrow will be fun. I'm going up just to Ventura County, just north of where I'm at. So like an hour and a half ride. And then I'm super excited to go to the Albuquerque, or it's the New Mexico Humane Conference in Albuquerque. And I wish I actually was going to be there a little bit longer, but I'm like in and out for that one. And then I'm back at Fort Leonard Wood, the United States Military Police School, talking about the link between animal cruelty and domestic violence. And that's a good segue here into our guest in a second, because it's a topic that sure is known in our industry, but maybe not known throughout the world. So something we want to make sure we're educating people on.
Absolutely. And I love it when we have guests that are across the pond because it's so interesting how everybody does things. So I'm so excited.
Me too. And it's how it all started for us in this country. Without the RSPCA, there would be no ASPCA. So it's pretty cool how that works. Before we jump in, we got to make sure you know that Tomahawk Live Trap is celebrating their 100th year in business. They're a family-owned and operated business who work with humane professionals around the world to produce the safest and most effective animal handling equipment available. You could save 10% on their products by using discount code Keep It Humane. That's Keep It Humane in all caps. You can visit them online at livetrap.com or 800-272-8727. And they will ship internationally. So all of you tuning in from good old, let's see here, good old, I'm trying to think of Wales, or maybe you're in, there's another place that I'm knowing in England, Luton. Maybe you're in Luton, England, or Chester. Maybe you're up in Chester. Anyway, check us out on Facebook. Keep It Humane. We're there. We're on Instagram. Keep It Humane. The YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out, like, subscribe, leave comments, do all that good stuff that you're supposed to do. KeepItHumane.com. But no more waiting around for our guests. I know you all have been. I'm waiting because I love these topics, and I'm so glad we found Mary Wakeham, and you're the founder of Refuge for Pets? That's the correct?
Yeah, that's right. I am. Yeah.
Welcome to the show, Mary.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what Refuge for Pets is?
Yes, of course. So, my background, it was really interesting you saying about the RSPC. Actually, I did not know that. But my background is in domestic abuse. So I've worked in the field of domestic abuse for a long time, probably about 15 years. supporting what we would say high risk survivors of domestic abuse. So people that are at risk of homicide because of their exposure to domestic abuse, because of the domestic abuse that's happening. And one thing that I found really difficult in my practice was I would work with a family, might get them a place in refuge, somewhere to go to escape the abuse, and there was just no option for animals. So what I was seeing is professionals would take animals home. There was just no real option. I've got my own lived experience as well. This is an area that's really close to my heart. But that's where Refuge for Pets came from. So in 2017, myself and three wonderful founding trustees, who two of whom are still part of Refuge for Pets, we got together and we thought, right, we need to do something about this. So that's where Refuge for Pets started. And what we do is we foster animals for victim survivors of domestic abuse. So when somebody needs to go to a refuge or an emergency, any form of emergency accommodation, we know that people won't go because they can't take their animals. So we will take their animals into foster care. And we've got lots of wonderful volunteers across the southwest of England where we're based. And our volunteers care for animals in their homes until families get safe, permanent accommodation, till they come out of refuge, and then we reunite animals with their families. And we take all animals. So it is mostly dogs and cats that come into our service, but we take all animals from hamsters to horses. So that's what we do.
When you,
Horses.
I love
Interesting.
that. I have so many questions about everything as we move forward, but one thing I want to make sure that we get a little bit more about you and your background. So you said you were working in the field of domestic abuse. What did
Mm.
that look like? What were you doing in that?
So my role was an advocacy role. So we have a role in the UK called an independent domestic violence advocate. And so in that role, it's my role to um, assess risk. So to support the people in the household to think about, okay, what are the risks? How can we safety plan? Advocate for people. What do they want? um, and just be there to walk alongside them really so that they're not on their own, and that they've got access to what they need access to escape that abusive situation, and also to help them through. They might want to go through the criminal justice route, they might not, they might want to go through the civil justice route. So it's just about being the advocate for that person. But of course, um, if we're going to really address domestic abuse, we have to look at the whole family, and that includes the animals in the household too. So, alongside Refuge for Pets, I have done a lot of research in the area looking at animal abuse as a strategy of coercive control. So, did my
Mhm.
PhD at the same time as setting up Refuge for Pets, and so that looked very set out to actually look at the link between domestic abuse and animal abuse, but it quite quickly realised actually this is more than a link. So this is a really specific form of coercive control. So perpetrators will exploit that bond that the humans in the household have with those animals to coerce and control and ultimately trap them in the relationship. And that's exactly what I would see in my practice too.
Can you talk about, excuse me, the some examples of what that looks like what coercive control in a relationship would look like with a pet?
Yeah, of course. So I mean, coercive control, I could talk for a long time about coercive control
Sure.
specifically, but, you know, as the late great Evan Stark from the United States uh, says about coercive control, it's a liberty crime. It's when the perpetrator denies the victim their basic rights, and coercive control is a perpetrator will use lots of different tactics to coerce and control their victims. Some of those can seem quite subtle to begin with, and they can be really hard to recognize. The perpetrator will put in place the rules of the relationship without us knowing what the rules are, and there will be punishments when those rules are broken, and that's perpetrators will often use animals. because we've got that strong bond with our animals. And for victim survivors of domestic abuse, you see it in practice, it came out in the research. Animals are often they're such a form of comfort, companionship, love, maybe the only other um, support that that person's got. So the perpetrator might use that animal by saying, if you leave, I'm going to kill the dog. If you leave, this is what's going to happen to the cats. Animals will be, there are many parallels between how the animals and the people in the household are abused. So perpetrators will physically abuse animals, emotionally abuse animals, deny animals from their basic needs, veterinary treatment. We see that a lot. So, you're not taking that dog to the vet, you're not spending 50 quid on that dog. Preventing them from sort of denying companionship. So even within the household, so not letting the victim be with the dog, for example, or be with the other animals. Lots of threats. We will see animals killed by perpetrators, and animals will sadly also be sexually abused. So this is all part of the coercive control that perpetrators will use. And it's a really big problem. It's a really, really significant problem. And a lot of the research in this area has come out of the United States and Canada. And we're just seeing more studies come through sort of internationally. But we've been talking about this for many years, this issue. Since the 1990s, we've been researching this. Um, and we get the link in practice, but it's not, you know, it's not always acted on. Certainly in the UK, we've got quite a long way to go. I think the States are a bit further ahead than we are, but we've got a long way to go in terms of really integrating our safeguarding. So, professionals thinking about the animals as part of that domestic abuse and services all working together to safeguard that whole family. So our animal welfare services, vets, and our domestic abuse services.
It's interesting because, like, for me personally in my career, doing this, I'm going, I think, on 17 years, I believe.
Mm.
I really haven't had a lot of experience in this topic per se. Ours has been just a little bit more of a corroborative kind of um, um, animal abuse. So it wasn't really necessarily linked to domestic violence. But, when I think of, the UK and things like that, I don't really think about, a lot of the crime that happens across the pond. Like I said earlier, do you have, and it doesn't have to be specific, but, what are y'all seeing over there as far as statistics are concerned? Is this link really coming from, domestic abuse as from, men to women or back and forth, or is it coming from both
Mm.
parties?
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, domestic abuse is one of the most significant public health concerns that we experience, not just in the UK, but
Mm-hmm.
globally. Um, I think if you look at the data, a woman or girl will die every 11 minutes
Mm.
globally
Wow.
by a partner or family member. This is a crisis, globally. If I take it back to the UK, so I mean, we've got no 100% accurate data around this because although we've
Absolutely.
come a long way in terms of how we respond to domestic abuse, it's gone from being a private matter that happens behind closed doors to a matter where services get involved in. We've come a long way, but it's still a massively hidden crime. It happens behind closed doors. It is a gendered crime, although anybody can be victimised by domestic abuse, absolutely. But we do know that it is disproportionately women that will be impacted by domestic abuse, um, particularly for severe and repeat and sexual abuse. But anybody can be a victim of domestic abuse, and there's lots of complexities around how people experience domestic abuse and the impact that it will have on them. Um, but we say that 1 in 4 women will experience domestic abuse in their adult lifetime, and it's 1 in 7 men, and it's 1 in 5
Wow.
children.
Wow.
Now, if you think about that, so that's huge. And then in the UK, if you think about there are animals in 61% of all of our households, there are a lot of animals caught up in domestic abuse. And then if we look at the research around this, and lots of researchers have tried to put a number on this because we love to do that. Research will typically suggest that animals were abused in half of all households where there's domestic abuse and where there's animals. And some research studies would suggest it's a lot higher, perhaps up to 89% of those households.
Ugh.
In
Yeah.
our practice, we see about 150 animals coming through our service each year.
Wow.
Many of those will have been abused by the perpetrator and also be impacted by their exposure to the abuse,
Sure.
by living in that environment. So it's really, really big, but it's an area that survivors find very hard to talk about. So we use risk assessments when we're working with survivors of domestic abuse to understand what risk they're exposed to, how we can best safeguard them. And one of the questions on our risk assessment, on our DASH risk assessment, is about animals. But we know that victim survivors of domestic abuse find it really hard to talk about what's happened to the animals because they carry such a huge amount of shame and blame. I should have been able to protect my animals.
Mm-hmm.
And they often won't talk about it because they're so worried that we as professionals are going to judge them and say, do you know what? I'm going to have to report that to the RSPCA because they've had in their ear from the perpetrator, you're a bad dog owner, you're a bad mum, look at the state of your animals, I'm going to phone the RSPCA, you're never going to be able to have animals again. So it's an area that we have to be really skilled at talking to survivors about so that they feel they can open up without fear of judgment.
It's
Animals that are silent victims, aren't they, as well?
they are, and
Absolutely.
it's it, how do I say this?
It's
No, it's such a like
a heavy topic.
it is. Thank you. And I think like as we put it out there and continue to say like there is help for you. Like that's kind of where I was going with it. If you look at whether it's your site, whether it's the Purple Leash Project here,
Mm.
whether there's another one called it's escaping me right now, but there's another website out there for folks, and it's empowering people to make that leap. And the problem is though is there's nowhere for victims to go with a pet, or there's limited space for them to go. So for what you're doing, creating this foster culture to help these abused animals or animals that come from abused homes, it now empowers these victims to say, okay, I can go, I can leave, I can get out of here, because otherwise, here's the dilemma is there's still that coercion, power, and control if you leave the animal behind, because that abuser is going to send photos or videos of maybe
Mm.
torturing the pet, or if you don't come
Mm.
home, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Mary, I have a question for you that kind of came up while you were talking about things. How do you keep these foster homes safe from these abusers?
Mm. Good
Uh,
question.
Yeah. Okay, it is a really good question.
and
So,
and I'll make it a two-part question. So how do you keep them safe? And then has any incident ever occurred at one of your foster homes from a
ooh,
abuser?
so I'll put a bit of context around the fostering, if that's okay.
Of
I'll
course.
try and
Yes.
to
Absolutely.
keep it succinct. I could talk all day about this. We've got limited time, but we're one of 4 specialist animal fostering services in the UK. So you've got ourselves, Refuge Pets. We're down in Devon and Cornwall, so the southwest of England. We have the Dogs Trust Freedom Programme, Cats Protection Lifeline, and a wonderful project called Endeavour, which is in the north of England. And across our 4 services, we cover much of the UK. There's some gaps, and we're working towards how we can fill those. But we work to a set standards, and those standards are all based around um, uh, domestic abuse safety, safeguarding, and animal welfare. So, what happens in our service is when somebody goes, when they need to escape, they'll call us. So they'll call Refuge for Pets if they're in our area or come into our area. And we'll take a referral, we'll get in touch with their support services if they've got support services, or we'll put them in touch with support services. We will collect the animal when they go. So the animal comes out at the same time as when that family leave, and we will take them to a foster home. And our foster carers are amazing, but there will be no contact. So we keep everything strictly confidential. So when a family goes to a refuge, for example, we'll take their animals. They won't be able to see their animals while they're in foster care because we know the lengths that perpetrators will go
Mm.
to find these animals. And
Mhm.
safety is key for us.
Hmm.
So the animals will go into a foster home. We won't tell the foster carer who the owner is, and vice versa. We won't tell the owner exactly where their animal is, but we'll give them lots of updates. So we will send them pictures, we'll send them videos. We will, if there's children in the household, we might write letters from the animals to the children. So we
Oh,
keep them really well updated.
With that
Um,
with the photos and videos, are there rules around that? Because man, people
yeah.
are savvy and they could like, oh wait, I know that area.
They really are. And when we place animals, we have to make sure there's no connection, no geographical connection to the victim or the perpetrator.
Okay.
It is really complex to run an animal fostering service. People think, oh, easy. There's so much to take into account. No photos, so our foster carers can't put any photos on social media. That's obviously a big no-no. Because yeah, I mean, your second question, yeah, that there are incidents, we're working with animals, we're working with people at a point of crisis in their lives. There's so much going on. Give you an example, we have had in the past going back, we've had a perpetrator put a lost post on Facebook, put a picture of their
mm.
dog on Facebook, lost. It was a very distinctive dog. So we had
Mm.
to pick that dog up from a foster home where it was so settled and just, it was a great placement. But we had to move the animal into a private boarding kennel for a couple of weeks. There was something like 7,000 shares
Wow.
on that
Oh,
post.
wow.
So, we cannot be in a situation where, the foster care is out walking the dog and someone goes, oh, I've seen that
Exactly.
dog on Facebook.
Exactly. And then they call that perpetrator and they're
Yeah.
like, it's right here at this house. And
Exactly.
who knows what that subjects the father. And then obviously you want to have your foster team feel safe because
Exactly.
the organization runs with that. So that's good that you're putting those safety measures in place ahead of time because there's
There's
nothing.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
We've had examples as well across our services of where teams have been followed by perpetrators. So we drive, unmarked vehicles. We don't come out in branded uniform when we're collecting and reuniting animals. We've had on our team, we've had a situation where we found a tracker
Oh my God.
in a bag of food. And of course, like you can get all these pet trackers on collars now. So
Yes.
we have to take everything off. We really follow the same policies of where a family goes to refuge. So we do the same with the animals as the refuge would do with the humans. Have you checked your phone for apps, checking vehicles, doing all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's always evolving as well. It's a constant learning curve for us.
Mary, you said something interesting that I didn't even think about. And, again, I'm a big purveyor of knowledge is infinite. You saying this is a public health crisis, and it's not something I think I've ever heard. And I think it's quite truthful in saying something like that. Because for me, I'm an epidemiologist, so I love, the viruses and all that stuff. And when you think about public health, you're thinking about illnesses and things like that. So thank you so much for opening my mind to this because that's absolutely a great segue to, what you're dealing with specifically. Um, but for how often are you able to reunite pets with their owners?
It's a good
And
question.
yeah, and on top of that, how many are still suffering through that cycle and having to come back and use your services?
Hmm. Well, do you know what? That
Great
is a really
question.
interesting.
It's a
Yeah,
great
it's a
question.
really interesting question. So we know this about domestic abuse.
Mm.
So it will take an average of 7 attempts to leave
Hmm.
that abusive relationship. So, you know, but I'm going to hazard a guess here that by the time people get to our service, you know, because being separated from your animals is a big deal, even just on a temporary
Absolutely.
basis.
Absolutely.
And many of the animals that we have with us, because we've got a housing crisis in the UK,
Mm.
we can have some of these animals for up to 12 months. The
Wow.
average is about 6 months. It could take up to about 12 months longer in the hand, in some cases to get housed. Our reunite rates are really good.
Good.
So just thinking about, I had a look at the data for last year. So on top of the animals that we already had in our care, so we supported about 93 families in that 12-month period, 145 animals. We reunited 59 animals within that period. So the rest will still be in our care and some will have been rehomed. Now, we have seen an increase in rehoming, and I think that's very
Mm.
much due to the housing crisis and
Mm.
the cost of
Mm-hmm.
living crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I know my colleagues in rehoming centres are full. They are inundated because landlords are selling their houses, they're having to go into emergency accommodation or are forced to take accommodation when they can't have animals. So, you know, our rescue centres are overflowing. So definitely seen a bit of an increase in rehoming. And I think that's tricky as well because a lot can change. Victims, survivors, when they leave that abusive relationship, they leave with nothing quite often. They might have gone from a rural setting to, a flat in an urban area. So having two collie dogs, for example, might
Mm-hmm.
not be, what it might not be possible going forward. So
Sure.
that's the other side of our role. So if animals can't get reunited, we will take them in for rehoming. But I just wanted to go back to your point actually, because it's really interesting hearing, your thoughts on sort of the public health concern side.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I didn't mention actually is, people are losing their lives.
Yeah.
So in our police data, for a 12-month period, there were 200, just short of 250 homicides and suicides as a result of
Mm.
domestic abuse.
Mm.
There will be many more that weren't ever attributed to
Absolutely.
domestic abuse. And there will be many more deaths where people lose their battle because of the trauma. So maybe they've turned to, coping mechanisms such
Mm-hmm.
as alcohol, substance misuse, and that will lead to a loss of life. So when you think about all of those other
Yeah.
elements, that's what makes it such a significant public health
Yeah.
concern as well.
Absolutely. And through your journey through this, Mary, have you seen the rest of the agencies around you, because for me, sometimes it's really hard to get through, let's say, our police departments or our fire departments to contact us when, somebody's having a mental health crisis, which we deal a lot with over here on that
Mm.
end. Have you seen them come around to being like, okay, I need to contact somebody because there's a pet left in this home of this domestic abuse victim? Are you seeing a lot of better collaboration as you've gone through your journey with your organization?
Yes, definitely. And that's really happened in the last couple of years. I've seen a massive step change, and that is due to collaboration. So there are some great people working in this area, great organizations in the UK and globally. And I see those organizations coming together because together we are stronger.
Yes.
And I see in the UK, I've gone from a situation where so we go to what's called multi-agency risk assessment conferences, where professionals come together to talk about um, high-risk victims of domestic abuse, and they have the aim of that meeting is to work together to work out a plan of how we can safeguard that family. And we've got domestic abuse services, social care, police, substance misuse, housing services, education around that table. Now, off the back of my research, one of the recommendations was that we start going to these forums to raise awareness about the animals and the importance of the animals in safety planning. Now, a couple of years ago when we started going, it was like, hang on a minute, why is that dog lady coming? You
Hmm.
know, why's that little
I mean, it's
fluffy dog
true.
lady?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an important meeting and there's a lot of information shared. I'm not sure that that dog lady should come. You know, but by being in those forums, in those meetings, you know, we were quite quickly able to show, you know, by being part of that multi-agency team, that, you know, we're actually key here because
Mhm.
that victim survivor's not going to leave if they can't take their
Mhm.
animals with them. And actually, let's talk about the cruelty. We must, that's everyone's remit. It's not just a matter for the RSPCA, although they're happy to get involved. This is a matter for policing. You know,
Mhm.
we need to look at what's happening to the animals as part of the coercive controlling behaviour. We can feed that evidence in. And actually, we should be looking at a separate charge for animal cruelty because these are prolific perpetrators of domestic abuse and animal cruelty. And unless we hold them to account, they're going to keep doing what they're doing.
One of the
So,
most impactful things that I ever got from the courses that I teach at the United States Military Police School, and it's a 3-day course on exactly recognizing the link between domestic violence and animal cruelty, was from one of the military police officers that said, "Look, I found in my experience, if I can, when I'm talking to a victim of domestic violence and they have an animal or a child that, has been subject to child abuse and they have an animal, and I can relate to that animal first and kind of make that my point of focus, I get so much more from the victim that if I would coming into it talking to them about the abuse itself. And I use that every time I teach the class because it's such a tool that people don't think about. Like, oh, just a pet. No, that pet is everything for this person.
Mhm.
yeah. And I think you're right. So people light up when they talk about their animals, even when they're at crisis,
Hmm.
Mhm.
in that it is a great way to start to build the relationship. You know, and at Refuge Pets, we're in a really privileged position because our dialogue starts with the animals.
Hmm.
So we often provide lots of other support to survivors because our dialogue has started, our relationship has started with the animals. You know, the team build up those trusting professional relationships. And you're right, you know, for a victim of domestic abuse, and I know I've touched on this, that dog sat on the sofa next to me at night is probably the only other living being that truly knows what's gone on in that household.
Mhm.
You know, because when we're talking to our animals, we don't use a filter. When, you know, if we've got children, if they're in bed or maybe they're a bit more independent, you know, that dog's the only person that really knows what's going on. They're feeling it, you know, they're
Hmm.
walking on eggshells like we are, they're seeing what's happening. And there's that sense of shared experience, you know, because these animals are often abused in very similar ways to the people. Um, when I did my research, I finished that research in 2021. 107 survivors took part in that research, and animals were abused in 94 of those households.
Mm.
I have to be a bit careful because I was specifically looking for people with experience of domestic abuse and animal abuse,
Sure.
you know, and it really came out that, you know, those animals had been through very similar patterns of abuse to the people.
So it leads me into my next theory that I'd love your thoughts on. And I've explored it a little bit and done some classes on it as well, which is, so we all know about the link between domestic violence and animal abuse, but what about the link between domestic violence and dog bites?
Mm.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so the studies that there's limited studies on that specifically, but I did find a study that was focused on how a dog was housed in prior to causing fatal dog bites. And so there's data
Mm.
there that supports that, yes, abusive households were more common where there were fatalities from dogs. And so the reason I bring it up, Mary and Ashley, like from doing this work with the military police school and kind of being involved and around it, I started to look at like, wouldn't the behavior of the dog change if it's
Mhm.
always
Absolutely.
exposed to abuse, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's abuse to the dog itself or it's always witnessing. And I had a case, and I'm happy to speak about this case. This case actually was in Denver when I worked the field, and the incident occurred with an first started as an argument of abuse between a partner. And during that argument, the dog jumped up and classic bit the perpetrator right here on the forearm,
Mm.
Mm.
bit him on the forearm, and caused, moderate bites, nothing major. But that abuser was so angry, he went back in the house, grabbed a kitchen knife, and then stabbed the dog
Mm.
severely. Thankfully, the dog did live. But that at that time, I didn't think about it. But then I realized, like, wait a second. Like, that's a perfect example of, like, okay, dog's natural instinct is to protect and defend. And the
Mhm.
victim, right? The victim and the dog typically have a stronger bond than the abuser and the dog. Typically, there have been cases where an abuser will like sick dogs on people. There's some documented cases of that or on their victims. And so I'm looking at you, Mary, and I feel like I just blew your mind with this theory. Uh,
Well, yeah, no, wow, interesting.
so it's I'll put it out here on the podcast that maybe you and I behind the scenes can work on some stuff together. And the whole purpose of it is now it raises awareness. So when animal control is out on scene and there's a dog bite, don't just look at it, oh, it's just another dog bite. Look at the big
Mhm.
picture.
So it's fascinating that you've brought this up because, um, I mean, I'm not an animal behaviourist, but we do see a lot of my team are qualified in animal behaviour, and we see it as a team. And I've learned so much over the years of how the different ways that animals are traumatized,
Mhm.
and that impacts their behaviour. But talking about dog bites, so we've just started a piece of research. So it was funded by DEFRA, that's the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. I had to look at my notes there because I'm used to calling it DEFRA. We've just been funded to do a piece of research which looks specifically at the use and abuse of animals in domestic homicide suicide.
Hmm.
Mm.
So, when there's a domestic homicide or suicide related to domestic abuse in the UK, we do what's called a domestic homicide review or a death review. And I have just been trawling through all of the published domestic homicide reviews, of which there were 611 when I started,
Mm-hmm.
looking for anything to do with animals. And my wonderful colleagues at the University of Bristol, Nate, who's there, he did this really fantastic piece of coding. So we were able to sort of pull out all of the domestic homicide reviews that mention anything to do with animals, duck, goose, fish, dog, cat, all of the derivatives. So I've just been going through, analysing all of that data, and it really is work in progress, very early stages. There's a lot of mentions of dog bites in there.
Yeah,
Mm.
And
and
yeah,
there should be. Yeah, like
yeah.
statistically, that's what I mean by that. Like
And
statistically, there should be.
some is, oh, there's one. Some is around the weaponising of animals by perpetrators, having the so-called service dogs. I'll just let her out.
She's like, Mama, I need to go.
Oh, and she's gone. Somebody must knock the door, sorry. Some of that, the mention of dog bites, is around the weaponising of dogs.
Hmm.
And a lot of it is people attending at A&E, perpetrators and victims
Hmm.
with dog bites. And of course, straight away I'm thinking, was that a dog bite? And or was it an excuse
Wow.
Mm.
for the
Yeah.
abuse? But there are many there that say, the injury is, you know, it is evident that it is a dog bite. So I can't answer your question specifically, but just this has just come to me.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, there's a lot of mentions of dog bites here.
It only makes sense. And Ashley, I know you
Mm.
can jump in on this too. Like we know behavior. Now, not
Mhm.
all behavior from dogs is specific to their environment, but a lot of it is. And
Mm,
Absolutely.
and that's that's my theory on this. And as we continue to grow and talk about it, I think there's an opportunity for us to really look at dog bites differently and not just, oh, it's a dog bite. Like, what were the actual circumstances, and
Mm.
how do we utilize that data to then help more people and then help more animals? Because that's the ultimate goal here.
It's about the professional curiosity as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Like, and that's what I see, in serious case reviews, homicide reviews, in my practice. It's about having that professional curiosity.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? Does that add up? Is that really what's happening?
Hmm.
What else
Absolutely.
could it
Absolutely.
be?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you just figure, a lot of dogs that we see in our sheltering system, a lot of times they're very unsocialized, so they don't know what a leash is. And you get that reaction, you put that slip lead on them, and it's like they're being, abused. So
Mm,
absolutely.
mm,
Absolutely.
And then the other stat too, which most shelters don't think or even recognize, that dogs in violent homes, uh, they average, I think it's like a between a 2 year, like 2 to 3 year stay, not life cycle. Like it doesn't mean that they're being like abused to the point where they're killed, but they're seen more as disposable. So then they end up in
Mm,
shelters more often, or they end out on the street because again, you got to think about it this way: is if it's a tool to coerce, etc. Like that abuser is like, well, we don't need this effing dog no more, and then we'll give it to a friend or put it out in the street or take it to the shelter, etc. And so then the shelter, now we're seeing more of abused pets just because of that.
that's very much part of that coercive control, isn't it?
Yes,
Getting rid of the animal, especially when a bond
absolutely.
is formed. I am on that point. Another thing that was quite interesting in the research was we are survivors. Did the perpetrator ever give you animals as gifts?
Mm.
mm,
And we found in 31 households the animals were given as gifts, and then the perpetrator went on to abuse them in 29 households.
Wow.
Yeah,
Not
as
big
surprised, but
per
like,
statistic.
yeah,
yeah,
sad.
yeah. It's allowing that bond to form, isn't it?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
then getting rid of an animal,
And then, yeah,
abusing an
taking
animal.
advantage of the circumstances.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mary, talk to me a little bit about your website, and I haven't given the website yet for our listeners. Refuge for the letter four. Wow, the number four. Refuge for number four pets. So refugeforpets.org. Excuse me. And I think you have to put .uk in the United
Yeah, you
States.
do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
refugeforpet.org.uk.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I mean, people can go on our website and see what we do, but it just basically explains the our animal fostering service, which we've pretty much talked about. There's lots of ways to support, but we do a lot of free training in this area as well, and we get people from all over coming on that training where we talk very specifically about animal abuse as a strategy of coercive control, and we talk about the research, and we get lots of people in to be part of that. So. Yeah, and there's lots of links to other services as
Mhm.
well, and a big organisation. Well, it's not a big organisation; it's a small organisation. But the Links Group are a charity in the UK that have been working in this area for about 2 decades, and they do a lot of training around the link between domestic abuse and animal abuse, specifically for many years with veterinary teams, but
Hmm.
that work has very much expanded in recent years. So yeah, there's resources on there. A good resource actually that I will say is in the field of domestic abuse, we use what's called a parent control wheel. And that was put together by the Domestic Abuse Intervention Programme in Duluth. There's lots of different wheels. So we worked with that Duluth, the team there, and we adapted it to include animals. So some of those resources are on our website too.
And it's something we've talked about here too. We've had a really well-known advocate for the link, and I'm sure you've heard of Phil Arkow here.
Phil,
Yeah, Phil's
brilliant
wonderful.
Phil, no
Yeah,
Phil yet.
yeah, he's wonderful, and he's been on the show several years ago, and he does wonderful work. And you can sign up for the newsletter, just the National Link Coalition, and just Google that and plug that in, get the newsletter. They have a lot of awesome things on there as far as preventative measures, resources, current bills. They're doing amazing work.
And that is an amazing newsletter. I've never seen such a big newsletter. It's brilliant. And we're part of the National Links Coalition as well.
Mm, that's
I,
fantastic.
I was looking at the website earlier before we started, and I do want to, these are some fantastic numbers on here, Mary. So there's a section at the bottom of the page that says people and animals we've helped to date. So
Mm.
they've helped support 450 families, 758 animals have been fostered, 536 animals have been reunited, and then also a great stat here too, 8,414 professionals have been trained in this subject.
That's great.
Kudos to y'all.
Thank you. It has been a roller coaster, but yeah. And all the professionals trained, that is testament to many of my colleagues who, we do a lot of free training because it's such an important area. And,
Mhm.
going back to what you were saying earlier, I've seen a real shift change in the last 2 years where, we were, you know, say you've got to ask about animals. We need to ask about animals. Don't assume there aren't animals in the household. To all of a sudden, people are really interested in this area. They're getting it.
Hmm.
They get and they wanna help the animals. It's just the problem is that we've got in the UK is when we train our social workers and our domestic abuse workers, and to some degree our police, we don't train them in animal welfare and
Mhm.
animal legislation.
Mhm.
And equally, when we train our vets and our animal welfare teams, we don't train them in safeguarding and domestic abuse.
Mhm.
So we're seeing a real shift on all of these professionals coming forward to, want to know more. How can I help? How can I help the family? How can I help the animals? And that's great to see that,
Hmm.
because all of those professionals have booked onto that training. It's not mandatory, you
It's
know.
it's not, and this statistic blew my mind when I was doing research a couple years ago. And not that we don't need it, but I was tasked with creating a training in Colorado because there is a law that is specific to the police officer standards and training guidelines in Colorado that they have to take a course of 3 hours that is dedicated to understanding the behavior of dogs so they don't shoot them unnecessarily. Like that's the course. However, there through my research, and this is a few years ago, so it may have changed since I've looked into it, but I guess through a few years ago, there were 6 states that had similar laws on the books where it was their law enforcement officers had to uh, it was mandatory that they took a course on how to prevent shooting of dogs. And then I said, well, I'm curious since I'm doing research on the link, how many states have laws that say it's mandatory that police officers take training on how to recognize the link between domestic violence and animal cruelty? And that answer is still zero. At one point, Kentucky did have a House bill on it that was going to make it mandatory, but that bill did not get passed. And so, out of all the states in this country, Kentucky was the only one that that actually had a proposed bill recently. So we need to change that. When I used to
Mhm.
do the training in Colorado, I would make it a point to spend about at least a half hour to an hour talking about the link and how it could relate to other things. Though the training was specific to the dog the dog shooting law. So
It's the same in not dog shooting law, but it's the same in terms of the training landscape here with our police forces. So across our forces,
yeah,
it will be inconsistent in terms of the training that they've had, if
one
any.
one thing
Mhm.
I want to put out there for our listeners. This is really important. So because I realize that not all of our listeners are going to be in our profession. We may have a listener right now that is experiencing domestic violence in the home, and I want you to understand that we're here to help, and the website is built. Refuge for Pets is built to help, and there's a button on there. I want you to talk about this button that says "Leave this site," and and there's a reason for it being there, and I'd love for you to explain that to our listeners, Mary.
Mm, that button is there if you need to leave the site quickly, and it takes you to a generic site that anybody could have been looking at. So if you're looking for information, this will be across domestic abuse websites. It's not a
Yes.
Refuge for Pets thing.
Yes.
So, this is really important. You are not on your own. So if you are experiencing domestic abuse, or if you are worried about somebody that might be experiencing domestic abuse, and domestic abuse doesn't have to include violence.
Mm-hmm.
There will often be violence or the threat of violence, but it doesn't have to include violence. It doesn't mean that it's not domestic abuse. There is help out there. So we're a UK-based service, but you will have local services that you can search for, and they will have a leave this site button so you can, cover your tracks. That's what that button's all about.
Is it programmed to also delete the history of the site as well?
Don't know that, I'm
Okay.
afraid.
Well, I did
Uh,
look in my bookmarks after I clicked it and it wasn't there.
Yeah, no, I don't think it will be there,
Yeah.
but important to think about, because as a victim sat there now, survivor listening to this, you will know your perpetrator better than anybody. So you will
Mm-hmm.
know what they're capable of, and you will know the level of surveillance that you are under if you are under surveillance. So, take the opportunity when you can to, find out who your local domestic abuse service is, make contact with them however you can, however it is safe for you to do so. There is probably a 24-hour helpline. We do have one in the UK. There's probably one in your area, and they will just support you. And there are options around for families escaping with animals. Um, and your local service will be able to talk to you about that.
Mary, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we wrap it up?
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It was our pleasure, and you're always welcome to come back on. Please feel free to share any updates that you'd like our listeners to know. Remember to check out the website refugeforpets.org.uk and know that there's help. There is help out there for you.
Definitely.
Ashley, anything?
It's just a great episode. Again, I'm all about learning, and it was a pleasure having you, Mary, and continue all the great work that you're doing. And if you need anything from us, let us know.
Oh, thank you. And it's amazing that you're shining a spotlight on this and the many other topics that you cover. It's brilliant.
Thank you. It means a lot. We know that there is a need for this, and I'm just grateful that there are people like you throughout
Hmm.
the world, not just
Yeah.
in the UK or in the United States, but throughout the world that are helping raise awareness and give resources that are desperately needed because we don't want people to think that they are stuck in a situation just because they don't know what to do with their pet. That unconditional love that they have. It's gotta. I can't even imagine how difficult it must be
Hmm.
trying to decide should I stay in a home that is extremely unhealthy and unsafe for me, but I'm staying here because I don't know what to do with my pet. We know that happens, and so
Mm,
now providing resources that say like, yeah, here we'll help you. Let's get the pet to a safe place, and then let's get you to a safe place, and then when everything is back to a normal situation, you can get your pet back. So
exactly. And that is such an important part of the recovery from trauma for both the people and the animals. To get
Hmm.
reunited, it's a step forward on that journey, isn't it?
it is. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, we thank you for your time. We want to thank our listeners, and don't forget to check out their website again, refugeforpets.org.uk. Check us out, keepithumane.com. As always, we like to say, let's continue to help people
Help animals.
and keep it humane.